Welcome to the part 2 of demand curves, in which we'll be discussing the shift in demand curve. We had a basic introduction to demand curves, and now we'll be moving on in specific to the demand curve, shifts in demand curve, that is movement and shift in demand curve. Okay. So for that, I'll be using an actual demo of things so that you can understand how it functions. Okay. So I'll just start off with some data, okay. And that some data is like this. So as you know, there's an inverse relationship between price and demand. That is, higher the price, lower the demand, and as price decreases, demand would increase. So in that same context, I'm going to plot this here. So I'm going to assume that there is a demand. There's a price of ₹2. In this case, this is on this axis it is price, and on this axis it is quantity demanded. Okay, and here for ₹2 there is a demand of, let's assume, 6 units. For ₹2 there is a demand of 6 units. So I'm going to plot it here. Okay. And this is my first demand curve, which is like this. So this is your D1. This is your D1. So this is your base demand curve, which represents the relationship between price and demand, in which you have a product quantity of 6 demanded at a price of 2. So this is it. When the price is 2, you have the demand as 6 units. So this is the situation. Now we'll see how demand shifts. Now whenever shift happens, the first thing is the price does not change. So the price is always steady. In the specific case, if you look at it, the price would always be the same. It will not change. Okay. The only change would be in the demand. So what I'm going to do first is increase in demand. So let's see what happens if the demand is increased at the same amount of price. So I'm assuming the price to go up to somewhere, no, not the price, sorry, the price is steady. The demand to go up to somewhere around 8. Okay. Now, at the same amount of price, there is a higher amount of demand. So I'll have a new demand curve, which is D2. This is a shift in demand curve, as you can see here. This is a shift in demand curve, which means there is an increase in demand. In this case, you have an increase in demand. Now we'll see what happens when a demand decreases. Okay. I'm assuming the demand will decrease back to somewhere around 4. Okay. Now at this price, at ₹2, now the demand, let's assume, comes down to 4. Now the new demand curve would be like this, which is my D3. In this case, this has come down. As you can see, the shift from D1 to D3, this has come down. And this basically is your decrease in demand. So whenever the basic demand curve shifts from D1 to D2, and then from D1 to D3, now D1 to D2 happened because there is an increase in demand in factors, because this happens because the change is in some factors other than price. As you can see in this entire shift schedule, there is no change in price. The price is always 2. There is only a change in demand. There might be an increase in demand. There might be a decrease in demand. Okay, but this is on because of factors other than price. Now, factors other than price means, for example, change in preferences of consumers. We discussed in the last video. For example, if the change in preferences of consumer result in a positive change in demand. For let's assume a type of food. If people like a specific amount of a specific kind of food, they'll go and buy more of it. It is not because of demand, it is not because of price. It is basically due to the taste and preference of the consumer. So you might have an increase in demand due to factors other than price. You might also have a decrease in demand due to factors other than price. In both cases, you will see a shift in demand curve. A shift, if you want a shift to happen, the price should always be steady. In this case, the price is always 2. This is the shift in demand curve from D1 to D2 and from D2 to D3. Now, you will have another concept here, which is your movement along the demand curve. Okay, so this also functions in a similar fashion. If you look at it here, okay, we can see here 2. I'm going to mark here 6. Okay, and this context. You can see this here. Sorry, I'm just This is my demand curve. Okay, and this is the point A. So point A represents that at the price point 2, the demand is of 6, quantity demanded is 6 units. At the price point 2, the quantity demanded is 6 units. Now, movement along the demand curve. Movement along the demand curve means this point A might shift upwards or it might shift downwards. The demand curve as such does not move. It will only shift upwards or it will shift downwards. Now, I'll tell you how this happens. This happens only due to change in price. This happens when there is change in price. So let's see how it happens. Let's assume the price is increased to 3. Okay. Now, as price increases to 3, okay, whenever price increases, the demand decreases. We've seen that before. So this might be the new thing. And the point will now shift from A to B. So when this happens, there is a movement along the demand curve. The point is shifted from A to B. Okay. Similarly, let's assume the price comes down. That is, it comes down to 1. If that is the case, you will see that the demand has increased. Now this basic concept is because you've seen that before. As price increases, demand decreases. As price decreases, in this case, demand increases. So in this case, price is decreased to 1, demand will increase to 8 in this case. This is a random number, but I'm just assuming that it is inversely proportional. Okay. Now, the point will move on to C. Now, you can see that there is movement along the demand curve. So the movement along the demand curve is primarily due to change in price. You can see that here. This is due to the change in price. Okay. So as price changes, you will see a movement along the demand curve from A to B and from A to C. In certain cases, if you see it from A to B, it means that there is increase in price and decrease in demand. And in this case, when price moves from A to C, it means that there is increase in demand due to decrease in price. I hope you understood that. So this is basically your shift and demand curve, and this is your demand curve shift from D to D to D2. Now this is happening because of factors other than price. The price is remaining steady in this case at 12, but the demand has increased from 80 to, in this case, 115. So this is an increase in demand. This is a decrease in demand. We've seen this before. And the quantity, the price is same. The quantity demanded has decreased. Because of this, you have a new demand curve. It has shift backwards. So if there is a shift upwards, there is a shift downwards. And this is a combination of both. You have an upward shift. You also have a downward shift. D to D1, D to D2. Now, because of this, if you look at it, D to D1 means there is an increase in demand. That is upward shift. And downward shift means you have a decrease in demand. Okay. Now, this is your shift in demand curve. We've seen that before, as I've seen. So this is a rightward and this is a downward shift. Now, why this happens? Okay. As I said before, price is always steady. Price is always steady. If you want to see a shift, the price should be steady. Now, this might be because, as I said before, we've seen this example, taste and preferences of consumers. Then you have number of consumers. As the number of consumers increase, even if the price is the same, more people will be wanting the product and the demand would be more. Price of related goods, tea and coffee. We've seen that before. Income. Okay. As income increases, people would like to buy more. In spite of the fact that the price is always same, there's no change in price, but just the income of people has increased, so they would buy more. Okay. Then you have expectations. People want to buy a specific product. It is not because of taste and preferences. They expect the product to have a higher demand in the future. They might go and store it. So in that case also, they'll create a higher demand. Now this is what we discussed before, which is your movement along the demand curve. Now I wanted to explain a specific thing in this context. That is why I moved into this slide. One is your extension or contraction of demand. Now extension of demand happens. There's a movement of demand. It happens as you've seen this curve. We'll come back to this curve again so that you can understand that better. Now extension of demand happens when price decreases and you have an increase in demand. Okay, in this case. Now, and similarly, contraction of demand happens when price increases and you have a decrease in demand. So this is your extension and this is your contraction. Okay. So this is why we call it extension. This is why contraction. Some people mark it here also. They would say that this is your extension in demand. When it comes from A to C, it is extension and this is contraction. I hope that is clear. this is the basic concept of movement along the demand curve. As I said before, this is your contraction and this is your extension. Extension is happening because you have high demand, contraction is happening because you have lower demand. And this is the whole concept behind the shift and movements in demand curve. Thank you.